Hello, my friend. Sorry to have to blindfold you to take you to this area, but you know how it is. Hold on, let me turn on the light. Hey, I apologize for this, but as you know, in the SCP, anywhere you have to go, you can't know the location, especially when you're a lower class as such as yourself. But the great thing about my seniority, I get these privileges. Anyway, we are holding, and by we I mean the Federation, I consider myself part of the SCP. But anyway, we are holding an adoption bazaar for a lot of our SCPs. We are kind of downsizing right now, and the best way to do that is to get rid, or for lack of a better word, get rid of the SCPs that we have in the facility where we're downsizing. And right now we are trying to get rid of some of the more safe ones from the Wondertainment lineup. And we are holding a mandatory bazaar that you can come and do by selection. And lucky for you, you are number one. And while not all of the 20 Wondertainment SCPs are available, most of them are. And we'll get to the ones who are not available. So, you ready to do this? Any questions? Unfortunately, no, you cannot reject. You have to choose. So you can either choose one of the easy ones if you want, as I suspect most will, or you can choose one of the harder ones to raise, or you can choose multiples. It's however you want to do it. So are you ready to go through all of them? Perfect. First, we are starting with Mr. Chameleon. Alright, which SCP is that? SCP-905. Mr. Chameleon is his common name. Basically, Mr. Chameleon is, as the name would imply, cannot be seen. Why? Well, he's made up of photons. He's made up of light, so he does not take a physical shape. He also cannot interact with anything. And the only way to feed him is to give him a constant flow of colored light. If you decide on this one, we will give you the specifications as to how to feed him, because too much, he starts to feel excruciating pain. The great thing about this is that he's fairly low maintenance, so it'd be pretty easy he'd be one of the easier ones to raise. What do you think? Alright. Next, we have SCP-2287. That's Mr. Headless. He is in the safe category. And as you work here, you obviously know the categories safe, Euclid, and Keter. So, safe, that's probably another good way to, that's probably another good sign with a lot of these. Anyway, Mr. Headless is relatively normal. The only thing is that, as name implies, he has no head. He is, now he does have his head, if you will, is visible, but does function as a head, except he claims to be blind. However, a lot of the people who used to care for him do like him. He was kind of abandoned, that was sad. And he was found only because he wandered aimlessly because he wasn't aware he was abandoned. So, kind of sad. The only thing you have to be aware of is that you cannot look directly at him. Most people who look directly at him feel disconnected and will often see a headless version of themselves. Now, I had never looked at him, so I don't know exactly what that means, but again, it'd be very adventurous. The good thing is he'd be fairly easy to raise. So, what are your ideas for that? Yeah, he could be very good for a Halloween prank. In fact, the funny story is that's kind of how he got lost in the first place, so be kind of cruel irony on, if you ask me, which I'm sure you don't, but you do. Alright, ready to go on to the next one? Perfect. Next is Mr. Laff, SCP-1799, aka Mr. Laff. He's a safe category. This one's kind of a tragic case, as a number of these Wondertainment SCPs are. His big thing is everything he says, people will laugh at, regardless of how serious or funny it is. While this sounds like it could be fun to do, it will quickly become a burden simply because you cannot communicate with him the normal way normally on how you would expect. You can't speak to him because if he speaks back, you will start to laugh uncontrollably. In fact, part of his, I guess, depression, because ironically he's pretty depressed, is because one of the people he was with, a D-class prisoner, was laughing so hard at him that he fell over, knocked his head, and it killed him. And Mr. Laff here had to live with that ever since. Now, I will admit that when I saw the security video, it was kind of funny, but that's another story. Other things he does is a lot of clown tricks he does happen randomly, can't really control. Like the flower randomly squirts out water. He randomly regurgitates ribbons, and randomly colorful puffs of smoke come out of any and every orifice. So this will not be an easy one to care for. However, if you have a bleeding heart of gold, then this would be a good one to take, because the odds are if he's one of the last ones chosen, he won't go to a very caring home. So okay. No, he's not that scary. He doesn't remind me much of Pennywise at all, so don't worry about that. Honestly, I've never interacted with him, but I have read some files. He seems like an upstanding guy, just had some bad luck. Alright, let's go to the fourth Wondertainment one we have. This will be our first Euclid SCP. This is Mr. Forgetful. This one's also going to be a challenge. Alright. His big gimmick, if you will, is that he never remembers anything. In fact, when he was picked up, I don't know when, I had to get that file if you're really curious. He didn't remember who he was, and that's been one of the challenges in figuring out exactly where he came from. This one you have to be careful with, because he will remember everything. He will remember nothing except the stuff he wrote down. If he writes down something, he will remember it the next day. The big issue is if someone reads it, they will forget what he wrote. And a tragic experiment happened when one of our doctors had him write the name of said doctor, and when she read it, she literally forgot who she was. So you have to be really careful with this. This one, in my personal opinion, may be one of the hardest ones to take care of, because if he has any kind of issue, he will not remember it next day unless he writes it down. But be careful what he writes down, because if you read it, you will forget what it is. So you gotta make sure that you gotta find a way to communicate, because he will not remember if you tell him, but if he writes it down, you may not remember if you tell him. And if you write something important, it's gonna be a big mess. So as long as you're careful, that could be a good one. So what do you think? Any questions? Yeah, he could be used as a effective political tool, but I tried suggesting that and I almost got the guillotine, so I do not recommend it. Alright. The next one, we have SCP-3537. That would be common name Mr. Shapley. Yeah, that's right, alright. Euclid class. Alright, Mr. Shapley, randomly will shapeshift, and what I mean by shapeshift is his body will change shapes and sizes. He can gain a lot of weight, all of a sudden lose a lot of weight, gain height, lose height, change eye color, change ethnicity, change hair, etc., etc. He considers this to be relatively painful, which again could be another tragic case of an SCP who just has a really sad existence. But from interviews, he seemed like a pretty decent guy. In fact, he claims that he was the first Wondertainment SCP created by Dr. W, him / herself. However, he also claims that he was the last one to receive the tattoo. In case you're wondering, the tattoo, every Wondertainment has tattoos somewhere on their body that tells them that they're a property of Wondertainment. So in case you're wondering what that is, so we think. Any questions? Alright, I can't answer that for obvious reasons. Let's move on. Alright, next we have SCP-1908 Euclid, goes by Mr. Soap. Now, I've interacted with this one before, and this is also an interesting case. Basically, he's called this because from his pores, he constantly produces a flicky soap that while can be dissipated the normal way, like any soap can, it's just a constant flow. It never stops. So any surface that he's on will quickly become slippery, with very little way to mitigate it. In other words, he has to be kept in some kind of, not cage, but some kind of aquarium tank type thing. In fact, that's what he's in right now. It's probably pretty likely that you will receive the same tank that he's in if you so choose to take care of Mr. Soap here. I have to tell you that it's kind of a tragic, he comes from a tragic backstory. What happened basically was he was found by this Chinese restaurant, I think, or Chinese factory that took him in because he was alone. And what they did was they basically trapped him and used him to clean their equipment. The reason we know about him is because he was injured when he was taken through one of the factory's machines, going through all the cogs to clean them, and he was severely injured in that. And he laments that he was used by the factory. So if you do use him, I would recommend not mentioning that you want to use him for any kind of clean reason that could send him into a catatonic state. So again, just be sensitive. I'm sure if he warms up to you, he probably wouldn't mind some minor things, but I'd be careful. Other than that, because he will be kept in a tank, he'd be fairly easy to take care of, as doesn't seem like he really needs any kind of sustenance. What do we think? So far, you can catch your eye. Well, hang in there, we still have a few more to go. Alright, next. SCP-913, Mr. Hungry Euclid. Well, Mr. Hungry is a fairly thin man, but ooh, excuse me. He has to eat 3 square meals every 2 hours. And now we're talking about this. The food you eat in a day, he has to eat every 2 hours. Why does he have to do this? No one really knows. He has a metabolism that's out of this world, which is surprising considering that he's not that physically gifted. He doesn't look that physically gifted. But what this does mean is you have to feed it. It takes a lot of resources to feed him. What happens if you don't feed him? Well, if he's not fed, he will ingest any and every physical manner he can, which causes him great pain. Could cause you a lot of pain too, because who knows, that thing could be your expensive car or TV. So I'm probably not making it sound like an attractive offer, but someone has to take him in, so what do you think? Any questions? I don't think he's concerned about the quality of food, as long as it is indeed food. Alright, next. Mr. Brass. That would be SCP-629, object class is safe. Mr. Brass is called this because his entire body is made up of brass tubing, which, according to this, can be rearranged in 73.4 billion different ways. Now you can add, as people have, you can add tubing to him, but it causes extreme discomfort. It was not the original tubing. And we learned that quickly because he came from what they called the Church of the Broken God. You see, this cult, I guess, found him and thought that he was part of their god. So they lured him to a church, promised him security, and they trapped him, thinking he was part of their god, like a messiah, if you will. The SCP Foundation eventually found him and freed him, and he was very thankful. I've interacted with him as well. Seems like a really nice guy. So, be fairly easy to take care of. Doesn't have to be given any substance or anything. So, this one, I personally, which I can't on record, but I would recommend. The kids can have fun rearranging him as long as they don't add anything to him, so who knows, could be good. What do you think? Any questions? No, you can't take them off. You can't take the brass off him and use them as for any kind of material. I'm not sure why. I don't have the authority to look into those type of files. Alright, well, if you're done with that, let's move on. Alright, the next one is, let's see here, SCP-644. Best known as Mr. Hot, object class Euclid. This one's an interesting chap. He can sense if any person has children or not, regardless of their biological or not. He also can tell what the children's desires are. It is believed that he was probably created by Wondertainment to help get the marketing out, to sell these items that Wondertainment may or may not sell. So that is an interesting thing. Now, this is a rumor. I have not had any confirmation, but there's a rumor that he produces these business cards out of nowhere, and they can catch fire into extreme heat. Again, I've never seen it because I don't ask questions. As you know, you don't ask questions here in SCP, but supposedly there was a big office fire a couple of years ago, I think like right before I got started here, and it killed some people. But I've never seen anything. I've never seen any news or rumors, so I'm not here to ask questions. Anyway, as long as you keep track of the business cards, you should be good. What do you think? Alright. Any questions? Great. Let's move on. Alright, halfway done. Well, actually, we will be after this. Number 10, we have SCP-2396, also known as Miss Sweetie, Euclid class. Now, the interesting part is, two interesting parts actually. One, she's the only female Wondertainment item, and two, they moved her down from Keter to Euclid. She was also the only Keter Wondertainment item. Well, the only official Keter. We'll get to that later. But now she's down to Euclid. I'm not sure why. I am not in a class high enough to understand, to affect all that. Anyway, what makes her interesting is that she has to constantly ingest large amounts of sugar to keep her blood pressure up. Blood sugar up. Now, the only issue here is that any male humans that come in contact with her will become her sugar guardians. 2396A, if you will. So basically, if there are any males in your immediate family, don't take this SCP because you will have issues. Now, I'm not sure how that's going to affect maybe trans males, but supposedly the experiments show that if you have a Y chromosome, you're going to have issues with her. So basically, if you have Y chromosome in there, don't bother. However, if you don't have any worry about that, you don't live with any males, don't have any males that you know in your vicinity, then this should be relatively safe. So we think. Alright. Next one. Now we're halfway done. Alright, next one is SCP-1007, best known as Mr. Life and Mr. Death. I'll get to that later. Object class safe. Well, Mr. Life goes through the life cycle every 75 minutes. What that basically means is every 75 minutes he will go through a human life. Every minute he will age a year, which this includes excessive and very expansive and quick muscle and bone growth, a lot of growths, including some deterioration, because once he gets up to 60, things are going to deteriorate. And supposedly he goes through some pain in this naturally, so just keep that in mind. What's interesting about him is that in his back, he has a key and a keyhole, and if you twist that, turn it, you can reverse the cycle anytime. So as long as somebody is constant, you could keep him in that in any kind of age that you want. Now, I'm not sure how you keep that consistent, but that's an interesting thing. You have to experiment with that. Now, on to this thing about Mr. Death. So, the card he came with, including tattoo, shows his tattoo says he's Mr. Life, but the card he's got says it's Wondertainment's Mr. Life and Death. Mr. Life and Mr. Death. So the SCP community thinks that there is a second one out there that we have not found yet. He is not aware of this, but he was also not aware of any other Wondertainment SCPs. So it's very possible that there is another SCP counterpart. Who knows? So if you receive this SCP, the good thing is he'll be easy to take care of. The only bad thing is you could, out your doorstep, find a Mr. Death, and at that point you would have to call us to recapture him, which could be a mess if you live in a suburban area. So we think. Personally, I think that would be probably one of the easiest ones to raise, because it doesn't sound like he has any real need for sustenance. Alright, next one is a personal favorite of mine, SCP-527, also known as Mr. Fish Euclid. Yeah, this one's not available. Why? Well, someone who works here may or may not have recruited him for a friend's Fortnite team. In fact, that's probably a big reason why he's Euclid right now, because he keeps disappearing. We may never know who the suspect is, but all I know is that this handsome devil, whoever this might be, is constantly stealing Mr. Fish to play on some kind of Fortnite team. So, he's not available. Alright. Best if you don't ask any questions. Apparently, the Foundation is not very happy with that. Alright, next we have SCP-917, also known as Mr. Moon. Object class, safe. Mr. Moon is fairly normal, but what he does is his face disappears with the moon phases. It does not cause him pain, but what it does do is leave him blind and or deaf, depending on which part of his face is gone. His entire face is gone when the moon is basically in the shadows, and his face is present when the moon is full. Does not like he needs much of eating, but he does show signs of fatigue as he gets towards the end of the lunar phase, as his entire face disappears, as he has trouble breathing and eating. So it'd be fairly easy to raise, but you'd have to plan it accordingly. Get him stocked up on starches as his face comes, so he has enough energy to be comfortable as his face goes. So, what do you think? Okay. I've seen him. The good thing is that he's fairly docile. In fact, it's possible he may decide on which SCP he wants simply based on personality. Alright, here's the next one. SCPREDD. Redacted. I have no clue what's going on there. There are rumors from equal and lower peers, as you know. Higher peers don't speak to lower peers. Supposedly, this SCP, who's the 14th one in the Wondertainment lineup, caused such a ruckus that it shut down part of the SCP in the Colorado district. Supposedly, this SCP is the sole reason we have a system of, I guess, object safety, such as safe Euclid and Keter. Supposedly, he is the reason we have Keter. Now, I have not been able to confirm that on my research, but he's not available, or she is not available either. There's also rumors that this SCP is the leader of all the Wondertainments, so. Alright, next is SCP-2855, Mr. Money Euclid class. This one, he's fairly normal, Hispanic. He takes the form of a Hispanic businessman, speaks like one, speaks like your used car salesman. Pretty entertaining fellow, but the thing is, his big thing is that he's basically walking currency. He can be used as currency. So if you don't want an SCP to raise, the best one to choose, in my humble opinion, is Mr. Money. Because as soon as you get him, all you have to do is find a buyer, and you can pawn him off, if you will. The big issue is you cannot sell him for anything less than his value. You have to sell him for his own value. In other words, you can't just give this to somebody who happens to want him and exchange it for like a candy bar or whatever. Now, what is his value? That one's a little tricky because it depends on time of year and where you are. I would, if you were to accept this one, there would be some kind of guideline that an officer would give you as to how much he'll be worth in certain times. So all I have to do is just find somebody who, for some reason, wants this guy, and you can pawn him off. Or sell him off. Use him to buy something. So again, it's high risk, high reward if you don't want an SCP to raise. If you don't want one to raise for a lifetime, this is the one to get. As the other ones, you will be stuck with. So what do you say? Alright. May I move on? Sweet. Only 5 more to go, then you can make your decision. Number 16. That would be SCP-920, also known as Mr. Lost, Object Class Euclid. Mr. Lost is an interesting SCP where he just wanders aimlessly. In fact, this is the other SCP that we don't technically have here, but what is interesting is we know where he is at all times. As if we don't directly follow him, then nothing would happen. However, if someone or something does directly follow him, then this person who's following him will become lost as well. They wander aimlessly, not knowing where they are. It's similar to Mr. What's his name? Mr. Forgetful, something like that? What did I say earlier? Yeah, Mr. Forgetful. But Mr. Memory, I don't remember. It's similar to him, but this is not permanent, as once you leave the presence of Mr. Lost, you will get your bearings back. So, sound interesting? Any questions? Unfortunately, no, it is not like Mr. Money where you can just pawn him off. The SCP Foundation will require you to know his whereabouts at all times and potentially have somebody go with him just to make sure he understands where he is and where his home is. So this will not necessarily be an easy one to raise, but at least it won't be one that will like ruin your dinner parties or whatever. Okay, let's move on. Next, number 17, we have SCP-2284, aka Mr. Lie, Safe Class. Mr. Lie has this gimmick where everything he tells is a lie. So when he says something, you know it's not the truth. There was an interesting interview where he basically said that the Church of the Broken Gods with Mr. Brass thought he was a god, and he said, well, that couldn't be further from the truth. And now people are investigating to see if Mr. Brass really is a god, simply because we know that Mr. Lie can't tell the truth. This one will be relatively easy to raise, but you have to be careful with his speech patterns. Apparently, he will often speak in half-truths or some riddles, where he's not technically lying, but he's not technically telling the truth either. Very rarely we catch him in outright truth lie. So this is one thing we have to really get used to and experiment. However, if you're willing to, this could be a very easy and rather entertaining SCP to raise. So what do you think? Alright, you're doing great, you're almost done. Alright, next we have number 18 of the Wondertainment lineup, SCP-2484, also known as Mr. Mad. Mr. Mad at least will not be moving anywhere because he is in a constant straitjacket, which, by the way, we did not provide. He came with it. He was found with it. What is interesting about him is that he can tangibly interact with others' hallucinations, and that can range from crazy psychopathic or schizophrenic images to drug trips to dreams. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. He can interact with some of your best dreams and some of your worst dreams, make them manifest in a way. Unfortunately, I don't really know how to explain that better because this is one of the few Wondertainment SCPs I have not directly interacted with, but that is what I've heard. It should be fairly easy to. This could be fairly easy to raise, but if what I'm hearing is true, it could also be a nightmare, literally. So what do you think? Okay. Next we have number 19, SCP-2933, Object Class Euclid, Mr. Scary, even though he calls himself Mr. Smiley. This one you have to understand what you get yourself into. If you decide to adopt Mr. Scary, you will not be adopting Mr. Scary alone. He is tangibly connected to a seaborne ship, which you would have to interact with at least once a month to clean and feed him. This is probably the most dangerous SCP because we've sent people into SCP-2933-A, which is the building he's in, which also seems to be alive, and we've lost them. They grow into rust and they become part of the ship. I do not blame you if you decide not to go with this, but this is a dangerous one. Luckily, I have interacted with him remotely, and none of this is on purpose. He's not even aware this is happening. He's a good guy. He's not going to hurt you if you find him. In fact, I'm convinced he calls himself Mr. Smiley because he's depressed and alone. So if you really have a bleeding heart of gold, I would recommend this one, as you would get some kind of interaction with him. The only issue is that you or someone has to go clean him and feed him once a month, which could get dangerous. It's also going to get expensive if you don't live near Seabourn area, but I'm guessing you probably do, or you would not be in this facility. So what do you say? Alright. What does he eat? You would have to ask the officers if you decide to adopt him, as I've only interacted with him remotely, so I was not there when eating and cleaning was necessary. And technically, if you believe the rumors, you're adopting 2 people because the building's alive. Alright, the last one. Here we go. This is number 20, SCP-2148, also known as Mr. Stripes, Object Class Euclid. This one has an interesting quirk where anything he remembers, whether it be a document or video, this said document or video will have black lines over identifying features. Like in a document, you have black lines over the letters, words, and in a video, you have black lines over faces of people, or dates, or places, or whatever. This is kind of a double-edged sword because you can get into a lot of trouble with this, and I don't even have to explain how or why. I'm actually really surprised that they want to release him, because a lot of our documents that are classified really should not have been because of him. There was a breach a few years ago before I got here, and they said that they saw in real time a lot of the documents just disappeared completely, went to black, because he was able to run amok and read a lot of things he shouldn't have. Now he has not forgotten. Luck have it, he has photographic memory, so he'll not be forgetting anything anytime soon. So if you use this, as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. Be careful how you use this, because anything he sees on TV, he will cause to basically disappear, which could be really awkward if he watches any kind of national television show. So we say. The good news is, if something like that happens, we know where to find you. Alright, so now that we've gone through all 20 Wondertainment SCPs for you to adopt, I'm going to give you a minute to collect your thoughts. Alright, have you made your decision? I'm looking for number of SCPs you want to adopt, as you're required 1, but there's no limit. You can adopt all 20 if you want, and which ones you want. Which one or ones you want. That is not something I record. You'd have to go to the next section, which again, you have to be done the same way. So, if you're ready, brace yourself, because we are a go again. So, I will see you, I guess, at work, who knows when, and God bless.